Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly primal. We are exploring that desperate, deep-seated human instinct to seek refuge right inside the Earth itself, when the surface becomes an absolute, uninhabitable war zone. We're going to look at what exactly happens when humanity is pushed to the absolute brink, and literally, the only place left to go is down.
It's a terrifying thought, right? When the world above becomes a war zone, survival suddenly means disappearing into the earth. Throughout military history, this innate drive to hide from destruction has forced ordinary people into complete darkness. As we trace this journey through some of history's most harrowing subterranean conflicts, we'll see exactly how these underground spaces transformed. Sometimes they became sanctuaries, or even thriving secret cities. But other times, tragically, they turned into escapable tombs. Let's kick things off with a deeply harrowing chapter from World War II, the battle for Saipan in 1944. Picture the Pacific Theater in June of 1944. It was the site of a truly catastrophic clash. You had 20,000 United States Marines storming the beaches of Saipan to secure a crucial strategic foothold. But they were facing an island populated by roughly 30,000 Japanese civilians. And actually, many of these civilians were just sugarcane workers who had relocated there from Okinawa. When the deafening bombardment and shelling started raining down, these terrified, displaced families frantically fled north, carrying babies, dragging their elderly relatives. They desperately poured into this vast, pitch-black network of limestone caves hidden beneath the island's mountains.
Now, you really have to understand the psychological nightmare these families were trapped in. The Japanese military had been bombarding these civilians with horrific propaganda. They were told that advancing American soldiers would torture them, assault them, and even eat them if they were captured. This psychological manipulation totally terrified families into staying underground. And making matters so much worse, Japanese soldiers actively used these civilians as human shields. They forced women and children to the front of the caves while the armed fighters hid behind them in the dark. And on the other side of this horrific equation, you've got the advancing Marines. They were encountering hundreds of these caves, knowing they were filled with enemy fighters, but having absolutely no way to know who else was hiding in the total darkness. Because of this, the American forces deployed incredibly brutal cave-clearing tactics. They used flamethrowers to shoot streams of burning fuel deep into the caverns, and they tossed in satchel charges, these massive bundles of explosives that could collapse an entire cave system in literally seconds. The devastating result here was the tragic death of hundreds of innocent families, killed by fire and explosions that were meant for the soldiers they were trapped with. This absolute powder keg finally ignited on the evening of July 6th, with a chilling order from Japanese General Yoshitsugu. He commanded that every remaining soldier and civilian must die with honor rather than surrender. The aftermath of this was just absolute tragedy. The very next morning, over 3,000 Japanese soldiers launched a massive, fatal suicide charge into American lines. But heartbreakingly, it didn't end there. Fully believing the propaganda and following the general's order, hundreds of mothers and fathers walked to the edge of 600-foot cliffs at the northern tip of the island. American soldiers stood at the top with bullhorns, practically begging them to stop and promising safe treatment. But entire families leaped into the ocean below anyway. Some were even shouting "Banzai" as they fell, wishing the emperor 10,000 years of life. Let's move forward in time to 1972, shifting our focus over to a devastating incident in Vietnam. During the relentless American rolling thunder bombing campaigns of the 1960s and 70s, entire Vietnamese communities were forced to do something extraordinary. They moved their lives completely underground into these massive networks, complete with hospitals and kitchens. But you know, the most profound tragedies of this era often happened on a micro scale. Along the heavily bombed Route 20 of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, there was a small shelter known as Tam Co, the Cave of the Eight Ladies. The trail was a constant target for bombers, and the North Vietnamese heavily relied on young volunteers to keep it open. This specific cave was home to 8 young women from Thanh Hoa province. They were just 18 to 20 years old, and their grueling daily job was to go out and repair bomb craters just to keep military trucks moving. The grim reality of their situation unfolded in a matter of seconds on November 14th. As American jets launched a massive raid, the women took shelter inside the cave. But a direct hit sent a colossal slab of rock crashing down, perfectly sealing the entrance and burying them alive. What followed was an incredibly claustrophobic and heartbreaking 9-day rescue attempt. 3 bulldozers tried and completely failed to move the stone. Using explosives wasn't an option because it would have killed the women inside. So for 8 agonizing days,
desperate rescuers pushed soup and water through a tiny plastic pipe they managed to wedge between the rocks. They had to listen to the women's fading screams, never actually knowing if the food and water was reaching them. And then, on the 9th day, there was just total silence. Now let's bring this right into modern warfare. Iraq, 2014. When the terror group ISIS swept across Iraq's Anbar province back in 2014, capturing major cities like Fallujah and Ramadi, hundreds of thousands of people fled practically overnight. A lot of these families sought refuge in remote, ancient desert cliffs near Habania. But just trying to exist in these caves became a daily, deadly gamble. The logistics of survival were just brutal. Think about it. Zero ventilation meant that the simple act of indoor cooking over a small fire caused severe smoke inhalation, creating respiratory crises, especially for children and the elderly. The environment itself was an enemy too. You had brutal 50 degrees Celsius heat during the day, followed by freezing stone walls at night. But water was the most lethal challenge of all. The nearest sources were miles away across the open desert, a desert watched by ISIS snipers and littered with hidden IEDs. Fetching water meant risking your life every single day.
But despite these literally prehistoric conditions, the resilience of these families was incredible. They dragged in whatever they could possibly carry. They used plastic sheeting and blankets for doors. And when fathers or older sons died trying to fetch that water, neighboring cave dwellers stepped up, sharing whatever tiny rations of bread, rice, and water they had left. Out of nothing but dust and darkness, they created a functioning 21st century community. And incredibly, they survived in those desperate conditions for nearly 3 years until Iraqi forces finally reclaimed the territory.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to a story of triumphant evasion from the 1600s in Lanzarote. Back in the 1500s and 1600s, locals on the Canary island of Lanzarote lived in constant, paralyzing terror of raiding pirates and North African slave traders from the Barbary coast. They didn't have an army, they didn't have stone castles to protect them, so they used the earth itself. Their secret weapon was the Cueva de los Verdes, an absolutely massive, ancient volcanic lava tube. Just to put this in perspective, it stretched nearly 8 kilometers from the La Corona volcano all the way to the Atlantic coast. In some places, it was 50 meters high and 15 meters wide. It was this sprawling subterranean labyrinth that outsider raiding parties had absolutely zero knowledge of. Because of this constant threat, they developed a survival protocol that was an absolute masterclass in evasion. The moment hilltop scouts spotted pirate sails on the horizon, they'd sound the alarm. Villagers would instantly grab everything they needed for long-term survival. We're talking sacks of grain, hand-powered grain mills, and even farm animals like goats and donkeys. Then they would completely vanish underground. They'd hang sheets of cloth deep inside the tunnels to block out any stray light or sound, and they'd just wait out the siege in total darkness. And this system was put to the ultimate test during a highly destructive raid in 1618 by the notorious pirates Taban Arayas and Solomon. When those pirates landed in 1618, they found ghost towns. The islanders had totally weaponized this subterranean maze, turning what could have easily been a tomb into an impenetrable fortress. The locals knew every single turn, every dead end, and every deadly drop. Any pirates foolish enough to wander into the lava tube searching for slaves became hopelessly lost in the pitch black. In fact, local legends say many of them never found their way out at all. The villagers? They safely lived inside that lava tube for 2 full months, until the pirates finally gave up and left. It's an incredible strategy of fleeing, surviving, and rebuilding, and it worked against attacks for over 200 years. So, bringing it all together, let's reflect on the echoes of resilience and humanity's final refuge. Throughout military history, the depths of the earth have served as our absolute final refuge. Sometimes they've been life-saving sanctuaries, and other times they've been devastating, inescapable tombs. But looking back at the mothers in Saipan, the 8 young ladies of Vietnam, the families hiding from ISIS in the searing desert, and the villagers outsmarting pirates in a massive lava tube, it all begs the question: what would you endure to survive the darkness? It's a really profound testament to the extreme limits of human resilience. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it leaves you with a deep appreciation for the hidden histories buried right beneath our feet.